My whole life, I've always passionately spoken up for what I believe is right, and I've always stood up for what I truly believe in. And I have zero intention of changing that. And I've seen other people say that they, no matter what, will always stand up for what they believe in. So in this video, I wanted to mention the things that I am passionate about, that I will not stop speaking out in favor of, and why I created my channel, Logomism channel, why I created the Facebook page, Logomism, and why I'm working on this entire philosophy. But rather than talk about the general philosophy, I thought I'd talk about the points today that I am very passionate about and things I deeply care about and that I'm not going to stop talking about. First and foremost, my undying love for the European Union and the Euro-Atlantic institutions in general. I have been a proud citizen of the European Union since January 1st, 1995. On that horrible day in 2016 when Britain voted to leave, it was gut-wrenching for me. I've lived in 7 different European countries, in some cases using my European Union citizenship, including Britain at the time. So, in my heart, I know that Brexit will be reversed someday and Britain will take its rightful place amongst the countries of the European Union where it belongs, and that the European Union will continue to expand to include the entire continent, and if that happens, I'll become a citizen of the European Union 2 times over. I also wanted to mention my support for NATO, the other great transatlantic institution, and indeed, as someone with citizenship in the US and 2 European countries, I'm a very transatlantic guy, and I absolutely love the transatlantic institutions of NATO and the European Union, not to mention the Euro, which I voted for in Sweden in 2003 and unfortunately lost, and the Schengen Open Borders Agreement. I also want to say that I absolutely support Ukraine when it comes to this brutal invasion by Russia. It breaks my heart to see many fellow right-wingers support Russia. I think in many cases just a reflex. They do the opposite of whatever CNN does. And while ordinarily that's the right thing, here it's absolutely wrong. This was an unprovoked invasion by the Russians, and Ukraine is an innocent country. And the sooner Ukraine wins this war, gets all of its territory back, and joins NATO and the European Union, the better. It also breaks my heart that Brexit, being the absolute fiasco that it has been led by many of my fellow right-wing conservatives who are right about so many other things. Another issue that I'm very passionate about is the men's rights movement. Here I didn't set out to necessarily fight for men's rights. Instead, I just believe in equality. And shocking as this may sound to many of you, back when I was in my pre-teen, early teen years in the late 80s and early 90s, I actually thought I was a big supporter of feminism because I believed it was about equality. I now know that nothing could be further from the truth. It is actually an anti-male hate movement. It's based on, I'm going to get later into this video about false narratives. It's based on the notion of the patriarchy, which is basically that men have systematically oppressed women throughout history. But such a theory is completely one-sided. It completely ignores things like male disposability, which I'll get to later, chivalry, and the numerous advantages there were to being female, and the fact that many of our traditional gender roles, which I oppose, in the past were actually just necessities of the time. Life was harsh in the past. One of the biggest reasons I'm involved in men's rights is, I mentioned male disposability, is I'm absolutely against the practice of having a draft, or as I call it, the glorified national sexist enslavement of young men. I realized throughout much of history that was probably a necessary evil back when empires were being built. But in this day and age, in most countries, it's not necessary. And if it honestly is, and if it's honestly so great, then it should include women too. It is time to end the sexist double standard of this. And even if it is necessary, it will never be more than a necessary evil. And it should be kept to an absolute minimum. And that's one of the biggest reasons I got involved with men's rights. I also wanted to mention my support for the intactivist movement. Intactivism is opposition to all forms of genital cutting, circumcision. Many people rightly have condemned female genital mutilation for being barbaric and horrific, and it absolutely is. But you know what? So is male circumcision. And before you say how dare you compare the two, realize that there are different levels of female genital cutting. I believe the United Nations recognizes 3 or 4 levels. And the least intrusive form of that is less intrusive than male circumcision. But why are we comparing it? Why not just end all genital cutting? Every person on this planet is entitled to intact genitals, and no one's genitals, male or female, should ever be cut. Also wanted to mention laws that clearly favor women that feminists choose to just ignore. I already mentioned the conscription one, but also some countries have a higher retirement age for men in spite of the fact that men die younger. And I've had feminists argue with me, well, that's not really sexism because, insert stupid mental gymnastics. Yes, it is sexism. And the ultimate sexism is thinking that only one sex was ever the victim of it. Real equality means equality for men as well. And it just breaks my heart that just mentioning that can often create such a defensive reaction. I also wanted to mention sexuality. Even though I deeply value my Christian faith, I'll get to that later, I also deeply value openness with sexuality. I'm fairly open when it comes to things like pornography and prostitution, for adults, of course. I'm not talking about children here. And I fully support consenting adults buying and selling sex from each other. And I see no reason why the government or anyone should stop that. And even from a religious point of view, if you think it's immoral, how is it worse for a single man to go to a prostitute than to have a one-night stand? How is it worse for a married man to go to a prostitute than to have a mistress? Even from a strict religious point of view, I fail to see how prostitution is any more immoral than sex outside of marriage in general. And that brings me to my next point. I am a firm believer in the importance of marriage and the family. I know many of my fellow men's rights advocates, and I understand why, have advised men to not marry, about the current situation in regards to marriage is horrible for men. But the good news is divorce rates have been declining. More and more states in the US and countries in Europe have been fixing the child custody issue, and the family courts are not as horrendous as they once were, albeit they're still pretty bad, and B, that's a pretty darn low bar. But societies need strong children and strong families. We must re-embrace the idea of marriage in the nuclear family, where a man and woman get married, only have children in wedlock, divorce is rare, and adultery non-existent, and by adultery I'm also including open marriages. Another thing I'm very passionate about is I deeply value my Christian faith. The Christian faith is one of the most important pillars to Western civilization, which I love with all my heart. Indeed, Western civilization in many ways is the marriage of the Christian faith along with the pre-Christian traditions of Greek philosophy and Roman law, and later on added things like the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, classic liberalism like democracy. And what many people don't understand is, more than anything, this set the morality that we need. And even highly secular societies in the West nowadays are living off of the legacy of Christianity. And we must re-embrace our Christian faith as it keeps us grounded. Also, you might be surprised how accurate it is from a purely secular scientific point of view. I recommend Lee Strobel's series of books. He is an atheist turned believer because when his wife announced she'd become quite religious, he decided to look into it. He was a crime reporter for the Chicago Tribune, and he decided to approach it based on what he knew best, a crime story, where you look at the evidence and let the evidence take you where it wants to go. And as he researched the claims of the Christian faith, the more he realized it's actually pretty accurate. Indeed, there's a shocking number of scientists who have gone from atheists to believers throughout their scientific career, realizing that it's actually far more logical to believe in a creator than to believe that all of this came about from nothing purely through random chance. It's called the fine-tuning principle. There's so many numbers in nature, like the rate of gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared, that if it weren't exactly that, the universe would collapse. There's so many of these other things that if it weren't exactly where it is, life wouldn't exist, the universe would collapse. And all of that is through random chance? It's far more logical to believe that there's a creator. And the Bible is far more accurate than you might realize. Indeed, usually several times a year, there's an article online about an exciting find archaeologically in Israel or somewhere else in the Middle East backing up a Bible story. I also wanted to talk about one of the things I'm most passionate about, and that is freedom. Freedom is a right for all human beings. And that includes freedom of speech, of course. And I have become disgusted with political correctness, wokeness. Indeed, I've been disgusted with political correctness for over 30 years. It is a cancer. It is destroying freedom of speech. And without freedom of speech, there is no democracy and there is no freedom. People need to be allowed to express disgusting opinions. I also want to talk about my undying support for free market capitalism. Capitalism has done more to lift people out of poverty than anything else. Indeed, since about 1990, largely through the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, and also more countries adopting more open markets, I have watched with excitement how poverty rates have plummeted around the world. The number of people living in poverty has gone down, and it's been said 1 billion people are on the cusp of climbing out of poverty. And as a world traveler, having been to 113 countries on 6 continents, I've seen it firsthand how much the rest of the world is developing. And it's thanks in large part to free market economics. Socialism, Marxism is the biggest cancer the world has ever seen. And before you mention the Nazis, realize Nazism came from fascism. And fascism was created by a group of Italian Marxists after World War I as a variation of traditional Marxist communism. They were going to mix socialism with nationalism. So Marxist ideas have given us the horrors of the Nazis, the fascists, the communists, and pretty much everything destructive the world has seen in the last 100+ years can be traced back to this sick ideology that needs to be taken into a ball and thrown out the window. The world must embrace freedom and reject Marxism. I also want to talk about the importance of cash. In just the last few years, I've been happy to see more and more people finally realizing what I've realized for a while, and that is a cashless society is a huge danger. Because think about it. With one click of a button, every penny you have in your name is frozen, and you have nothing. You are worse than a beggar on the street, because if you don't have cash, you can't go beg on the street. And the idea that all of your money can be frozen just like that is a terrifying thought. The idea that every transaction you ever make is permanently recorded is a terrifying thought. And before you hit me up with this, well, if you're innocent, you have nothing to hide, innocent people are entitled to privacy. And I'm glad more and more people are realizing the horrors of a cashless society. I try to use cash as often as I can. It's not 100% religiously, of course, buying things like airline tickets or maybe checking into hotels or rental cars. I don't use cash for that. And of course, I do online purchases as well. But generally speaking, stores, restaurants, bowling alley, movie theater, you name it, I try to use cash as much as I can. And I urge all of you to do that. Another passion I have of mine is my love of saving the world's smaller languages. Every language is a piece of the world's heritage. When a language dies, the world loses a little of itself. It breaks my heart to see languages that have died in the past. It breaks my heart that the Celtic languages, an entire branch of the Indo-European family, is in danger of dying. The people of Ireland should speak the Irish Gaelic language just like the Dutch speak Dutch and the Italians speak Italian and the Swedish speak Swedish. Same thing with Scotland with the Scottish Gaelic language, or Welsh in Wales. Indeed, I lament the deaths of several branches of the Indo-European family, such as the Hittite language in the Anatolian branch in modern-day Turkey, or the Tocharian branch in modern-day Western China. It's a shame that we have lost these languages. I often think, if there were still countries that spoke these languages today, what would those countries be like? Would the people be famous for being hospitable, stubborn, hardworking, kind? Who knows? What would their architecture be like? What would their national cuisine be? These nations are gone, and it's sad to see that. So we must preserve all the world's smaller languages. And indeed, as a U.S. citizen, I was very glad to see when Trump was president, he signed legislation to provide funding to save the Native American languages, because the Native American languages are an important part of the cultural heritage of the United States of America. I would like to also add that I'm a firm believer that Latin should be the official language of the European Union. I've studied some Latin, but I need to do more. I've studied a total of 27 languages, but I can't speak them all, so I'm trying to get pretty much all of Europe to at least the B1 level linguistically. And I have my tie here for the Isle of Man, as I have a Manx class every Tuesday night from the Isle of Man. And I've studied 4 of the 6 Celtic languages. I mentioned those in particular are a passion of mine. I also wanted to address the issue of false narratives. I mentioned patriarchy theory. The reality is traditional gender roles were agreed upon by both men and women, largely based on the necessity of the past, and there were advantages and disadvantages both ways. Patriarchy theory is repackaged, reheated Marxism, and like a lot of false narratives, there are pieces of reality to it, but they're taken often but not always out of context, grossly exaggerated, with all counter evidence angrily denied, and they're put forward as being an all-encompassing belief. Also, I'm deeply concerned about the environment, but I don't like the way protecting the environment has become environmentalism. I have read from scientists who do not believe in the narrative of climate, and I have seen numerous predictions over the years of environmental catastrophe that never came true, but did result in more regulations and higher taxes. And I have seen how scientists who don't believe in official narratives are silenced. Why? Let them speak up. If what they're saying is true, that's good news. And if not, well, then we'll see it. But stop silencing people who disagree with official narratives, because in the last few years, we have seen how official narratives have often proven to be false, and how those who are being silenced were actually the ones who were right. I'll mention an environmental problem that I think has not gotten enough attention, partly because the official narratives like climate get all the attention. The draining of the Aral Sea between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. For the amount of money we've spent on things like climate, we could have instead fixed and restored the Aral Sea. And it's heartbreaking that we've not done more to restore the Aral Sea. Also, I was a big supporter of recycling, but more and more it's coming out that recycling doesn't work. It does work for things like metals, like aluminum, but for plastics, it often just goes to the same landfill anyways, so there's no point in it. But there are people who get so defensive at that point because recycling is like a religious practice to them. Why? The point is protecting the environment. If recycling works, let's do it. If it doesn't, let's not. Why get all emotional about it? Finally, I wanted to talk about the media bias with regards to certainly the U.S. Republican presidents. I supported George W. Bush back in the day, and it was ridiculous how unpopular he became. Now, in hindsight, he really wasn't that good. I now regret my support for the war in Iraq. But that being said, the hatred of him was also ridiculous. And at this point, there are many Democrats in the U.S. who like him, and indeed, I almost wonder if they don't like him more now. And if we look at Trump and how hated he became, well, why was he so hated? He was a threat to the political establishment, which we need. And to those of you outside the U.S. who just think, oh my gosh, you would support someone like that, look at his actual record. Look at the way he made the U.S. energy independent. Look at the way he secured the border. Look at the way he got peace agreements between Israel and many of the Arab countries. Look at the way he was working on opening up North Korea. Look at how he didn't start any new wars. Take another look at his record. And I guess one more thing I'll mention. The last few years with this COVID scamdemic just infuriated me. I have seen, I mentioned with hype with regards to the environment, how the media hypes something like Y2K, for example, and in the end it never comes true. I have become so cynical about this. I saw that this virus was no worse than the seasonal flu, and the amount of damage the overreaction did to it with the lockdowns, the face diapers, etc., etc. When all along I knew that there was no need for any of this, that the face masks don't work, they cause problems, the mandates infuriated me, and I actually believed in the vaccine. I had 3 doses, but we now see how dangerous that was and how people were silenced for speaking the truth. We must make sure that that never happens again. So these are the things I'm passionate about. These are the things I intend to continue to fight for. And by now I've probably pleased and angered everyone at the same time. Well, I'm Dr. Carl. Enjoy.